bit bizarre because we're all sitting in random places staring at screens or with headphones on, but I will try and keep it somewhat interactive. Lauren and I talked about trying to do questions as we go, so please park your questions out there and I will investigate those as I talk. I put this talk together because it's one of many topics that I think we need to start talking about. I see a lot of people are doing some very simplistic things when it comes to scaling up Agile, and I don't think that necessarily works, nor do I really see that it makes sense. So to start with, I put up a lot of the companies that I've been working for because I spend most of my time working. Lauren, I don't know if you were hearing that. I'm hearing a little echo on my side. Oh yeah, a lot of echo from the phone.
You are hearing the echo?
I am, yeah, I can see it looks like a lot of people are saying that as well.
Okay.
Is that any better? That seems better.
Yes. Yes,
okay.
That seems better.
Brilliant. I apologize for that. Thanks for those are the kind of questions we need to see. And Lauren, if people raise their hand and it's problematic like that, I'm going to look for you to kind of pick up on that stuff. Anyways,
Absolutely.
I put these up because most of the organizations, the places where I'm coaching, it is at scale. We're doing things that are more than a few teams. We're doing things with, thousands of people or hundreds of people. I would say that scaling doesn't have to be thousands or hundreds. Once you step a little bit outside of a small handful of people that are working together, you drive into a lot of complexity right away. 3 groups spread across 3 locations where there are different floors and different buildings or different cities or different countries, it becomes significantly more difficult. This is one of the questions, or some of the questions I wanted you to start with. Like, first of all, why do you want to scale things? Is it because you had success and you want to replicate that success? Is it because you had success and you think it's going to happen everywhere? What concretely are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? What works with one group might not magically work across all these other groups. That is the problem that I see, is because people are unaware or they're not looking at the unique context and challenges from Team A to Team B, even if those people sit very close to each other in the same building and work on the same product or project. When they work not in the same building, not in the same culture, not on the same project, but there's some kind of producer-consumer relationship there, there is a complexity in you. I don't see that it's successful to just start applying the same process everywhere. That's not to say that I don't think those are good tools, but another way to say what are your goals is, do you want enterprise agile, which I think of as more of a thing, that people think there's this concept that you can just snap into a company, or is that just a dimension of what you're really looking for is kind of competitive agility, something that might not look the same from group to group, but drives towards producing the same outcomes across groups. Another way to phrase that would be, do you want everyone to do the process, or are you trying to drive consistent outcomes? So what I mean by that is that recently, maybe 6 months ago, my company, we started coaching a fairly large group, 200-300 people distributed across 3-4 locations. And they had been using Scrum for a couple of years. And so a lot of people knew a lot of the words, but I wasn't seeing a lot of the value flowing. Or as I heard someone say the other day, the only thing that crossed the chasm was the words, not the concepts, not the idealistism, not the exploration piece. The metrics and the words crossed the chasm, but the idea of searching and learning didn't. So instead of putting everyone through a course, what we did is we took all the groups that said they wanted to be doing Agile and we put in a simple set of outcomes. These are the 5 questions all those teams need to answer, because I don't necessarily find it valuable that everybody does the same process, but it's very common that a group of people that are working together need to drive towards the same set of outcomes. So what I mean by process focus often gets latched to what people call enterprise Agile. Not all the time, but often it does. And They want everyone to do the same process. This is something that is an interesting anti-pattern. I work with some PMO groups that are really thinking about outcomes, and they look at Agile methods and they say, wow, this is a great way for us to kind of drive similar outcomes. Conversely, I've seen at many companies, especially larger companies, companies where people are trying to scale Agile, a PMO group comes in and instead of thinking about what they're trying to achieve, they want everyone to do the same process. That would be meaningful if they produced the same results. So that's an interesting anti-pattern that's popped up in the last few years. This we're doing Scrum butt measure that came out of a group of people that I think was being very successful, and they were trying to challenge people to say there's a critical mass of practices that if not done together don't provide as much value. In extreme programming, that was you had to do all 12 practices. Sadly, I now see it used where people are trying to scale Agile and they walk in and they start saying, well, they're doing Scrum butt, as though that's not as good. And if they're looking at the results and they're saying, well, if they were doing all these other things, I think they would be doing better, that would be one thing. But some of them are just assessing whether people are following the process. The third one that I think happens, and it's interesting, you know, in the VersionOne space, because VersionOne is a tool. When I met the people at VersionOne, it was a very long time ago at an XP Universe conference in New Orleans. And the thing that drew me to the organization is that the person that was running the show, and pretty much still is, was definitely a seeker, looking for information, not a hard sell. Asked me about myself quite a bit before he started telling me about his tool. And I'm not going to get into a bunch of tool wars because I don't want to start that, but I do walk into a lot of companies where Agile, what is defined as Agile, equals the name of their tool. And they don't really know the essence or what the value behind the process. They're just saying, we're using this tool, therefore we're Agile. And that often happens when people are scaling things because they're trying to drive consistency. It's just they're doing it, you know, flying in the face of what I think the people that wrote the Agile Manifesto, ironically a decade ago, were trying to say is it's individuals' interactions over tools, not instead of tools, not without tools. But if you don't have collaboration, it's all for naught. Doesn't matter how good your tools are. Another common challenge I see when people are scaling things is they take a simple practice, like the 3 questions, and they assume that because everybody's doing that practice in their stand-ups, in their daily scrums, that they're being successful. For anyone that doesn't know the 3 questions, what people typically say is, what did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? What's blocking you? Or if I said it, it would be what I did yesterday, what I'm going to do today, or what's blocking me. It's interesting, over the years, I realized that the problem that I have with the 3 questions is they're about me. They're about I. And I think it starts to, in many instances, drive teams apart. It doesn't grow that we're bonded together in some ways. A practice that fits very well and that, you know, used pragmatically in scaling things up is when you have multiple teams that are all spinning at some frequency, 2-week iteration, 3-week sprint or whatever, but you have a group of people that meets across those teams, a scrum of scrums. These are spinning at this frequency. This group maybe meets once a day, maybe every other day, and it's a leadership group. Other people, they go into their space and they have a scrum of scrums because they're trying to do enterprise Agile and they're not really having the right discussions. So it's the same problem that can happen down here. It's just at a different scale. And these are just examples. Right? I'm not saying that everybody struggles with this, but oftentimes when people try to take the simple notion of a Scrum team as a product owner, a Scrum master, and the team, and they scale that up, well, they have another product owner, another Scrum master, another team over here. And then I've heard people talk about having a product owner of product owners and a scrum master of scrum masters. But I rarely see that that's a sustainable model. And I understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to take success that they had in one place and scale it. But I don't think that's really the right model for scaling. They don't see that always having to have a scrum master is a sign of health. It feels more like you're trying to do the process or you're trying to follow some practice. The worst one that I've discovered, stumbled into, tolerated, is this Orwellian chicken and pig story. And an example of it is that there's a manager at a meeting, and for some reason people don't talk when that person's there. And so they say, well, people, they're uncomfortable with the manager there. So they turn that person into a chicken, meaning they don't get to talk during the meeting. And the very first time I heard this joke, I thought, boy, if someone shows up and they don't talk, I'm not sure that telling them to shut up is really a long-term solution. It certainly doesn't work at scale because you tell enough people that they don't get to talk and they're not silent, especially if they're in positions of power. And I thought of George Orwell. George Orwell said, in Animal Farm, all animals are equal, some animals are more equal. And I think it's time for us to actually go back to a level of equality and start building teams. Teams where product owners, for instance, are on the team, not outside of the team. That was a mistake I think we made in trying to set up structure. I think it's time for us to go back to where we started a little bit and start challenging ourselves to start learning. This is the person that so famously said, those that can't remember the past are doomed to repeat it. So instead of thinking of a process focus, I guess I want to shift us towards what are we trying to accomplish. I think a lot of this thinking was alive and well 10 years ago or so when this Agile thing was new. Sometimes it didn't cross the chasm, though. All that crossed the chasm was the 3 questions and the chicken and pig stories. And to scale things up, my experience is not about everyone doing the same process. It's about driving people towards some of the same outcomes. So I said I would go through and talk about within, across, and outside of teams. I changed my style a little bit, and I wanted to talk topically, but I'll still address that perspective because I think it's a very good perspective. Before I talk too much, and if you've heard me talk before, you probably know that I don't necessarily care about any brand. In fact, I grow more tired every day about people trying to say whether something's Scrum or whether something's Kanban. In fact, most of the people I meet and I start talking to them about what Kanban is, I still don't understand it. I get the concepts and the practices, but I meet a lot of people that had a bad Scrum experience that are now having a good Kanban experience. But they're using similar practices, and I wonder often if maybe this works and this doesn't because of how they tried to apply it. They got too addicted, too dogmatic about the style instead of thinking about the outcome. What are we trying to accomplish? So these outcomes are brand-free outcomes. Integration readiness, continuous integration, continuous delivery. Focusing on product delivery, trying to say, are we really learning? Mindful, meaningful learning that we do something with, all sorts of different learnings. And do we have real leadership? I expressly didn't choose leaders because I think leadership ties to the spirit of what people are trying to go with self-organizing. As we go through and talk about each one of these, I will mention a little bit of this idea of within a team. In Scrum, 7 plus or minus 2, that group of people that's bonded together trying to get something done. Across teams, meaning there's a producer-consumer relationship between a team. Or outside of teams. Many people that are outside of teams, we call them. A lot of they provide the funding for projects. So what do I mean by integration readiness? I was thinking about how to draw this, and I don't really know who's in the webinar, so a simple way would be there's a source control system, there's dude over here at his computer, and then there's a continuous integration box. So checks in, CI pulls that up. If there's a problem, send the status back to that person, and that's usually in some kind of a dev realm. Then there's usually some set of environments out to a production space. So continuous integration started solving this problem in here, saying if there's several dudes that are committing into their space, then they both are informed when there's a problem, normalized by this little unit right here. Some groups then go further and they learn that, when it's good, let's start pushing it out into this QA space. Can we do that automatically? Some version 1.5.6. The people that have gone to continuous delivery have become good enough, usually by having a pile of tests that are user advocacy tests, not just unit tests, the tests that validate that the product is delivering the value. Get fairly good at pushing it into environments. Automagically is the word I would use. So that's from continuous integration, or what I was calling back here, integration readiness. They have a real product more often. If you're new in this space, this is a great place to start. I would argue that this doesn't really have much to do with Agile anymore and everything to do with dealing with competition. So that's within a team. If you cross a couple teams, you have Team A and Team B back here, you still have that problem. So maybe in a dev space, some groups will have two different CI boxes and they'll be sharing something. And maybe it doesn't even get put together out in the QA. They still have separate versioning where things are being moved across. But when it gets out to here, there's just one thing. And this across team, across environments, across version integration problem is a difficult problem for many, many companies. And it doesn't have anything to do with Kanban or Scrum or extreme programming. It is a problem that people need to solve if they want to be competitive. And many of the people that are doing continuous delivery started out with continuous integration and stepped towards that. At scale, this problem at this side becomes much more difficult down here because it grows across the complexity of the people doing code. One of the very large engagements I'm about to start, this will be a primary focus for us, cutting across 5 geos and hundreds of people, hundreds of just developers. Another of the areas I wanted to talk about was product delivery. And this is a picture I use quite often because I think it speaks to what I'm talking about. This side is really more pure product or non-developer concept design, product design thinking. Who, over here, there's a persona, is trying to do what, and these are all stories down here arranged in what a guy named Jeff Patton started calling a story map. This gives us a view of she's trying to accomplish this, and the base path that she goes through might go down like some kind of a happy path. Or it could be that we want to look at a little different slice of her use of the product, and it cuts through these a little bit differently. This line from here to here is where a lot of real value, product value, is delivered. It's not insignificant to learn how to deliver one of these stories. But I just sat with someone from a documentation group, and his frustration was he has to try and piece the stories back together. If we can start shifting from which things did I get done in the last iteration to are we done with this whole user experience or a chunk of real product value, then this side over here becomes more of the delivery mechanism where in this group they just pull things from here, they pop it into there, and it flows through this cycle over here until it's done. Sometimes the things that go over are user value, stories, there might be a one-to-one relationship, Other times, things that need to happen pop up here, technical debt, for instance. But their focus is not how many points. Their focus is, are we getting one of these experiences done? So that works well within teams. That also turns out it works well across teams to scale things up. So a simple model, you have these people over here in the traditional Agile lingo, and they're working on this backlog, and they might be what people would call grooming, getting ready, and this is them sprinting. Let's just arbitrarily say this represents 2 weeks, so there's your 2-week boundary, and they have their planning session, stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up, retro, demo, rinse and repeat. But someone is trying to figure out how to give them good stories, to think about user use and context, to bring that to bear into that planning game. And when I say an iteration, I said 2 weeks, but I don't really get hung up on that cycle, other than if it's too long. So it could be 2 weeks, it could be 2 days, there could be no iteration. But someone needs to be able to have good product stories to tell. So this is more of a one-team view. I'm going to erase all this stuff for a second. And this becomes multiple teams who are all trying to build one thing. So I'm going to say many teams, one product. It's even more important that there's a good story to tell across these teams. If you use a simple model, if each team has a product owner, then those people still have to get together up here and have a good product story to tell. And I find that the simple one-to-one mapping is really not the right solution, because if you drive product ownership into these teams down here and they start taking ownership, then you can kind of do more product planning. My experience is every time you get good at optimizing this cycle, you find in a lot of companies that people aren't very good at this cycle, or not very experienced, or not fresh. They haven't been honing their skills. We put a lot of energy into this. As you scale things up, I find that the complexity grows in that space because we've optimized throughput of delivery, and we start asking for more and more from this product side. Over time, I've realized that there is a real cycle out here. Mary Poppendick, amongst others, has called this from concept, the simpler version, to cash. It's usable. This is a smaller cycle than I think she's typically talking about. But what I see is, worst case, this is how long it takes to get something done. Done, meaning it's a meaningful chunk of product. Maybe this is the best case situation right here. And I've been trying to work with environments where there's multiple delivery teams, or many teams, one product, to establishing a product planning cadence up here. Continuous product planning, some way where this group is trying to stay in sync. And this is not a new concept that I came up with. In fact, it was clear to many, many people early on, 2003 or so, when a lot of us started doing multi-team development, that if the product planning cadence, or the continuous product planning, stays about 2x in front of the delivery cycle for the teams, that's a good model, and that tends to be even more valuable when there's multiple development teams down here. So that, you could, I said, from product portfolio, some people call that a program. Getting good at this product planning cadence to have a good story to tell across teams is essential. Another one would be, how are we using metrics? I've watched a lot of people take these neat metrics we've produced, and in some cases turn them into weapons, where they're not helpful things anymore. Lauren, just real quick, I can't really read the questions too well, so if someone's asking something or they can't hear, maybe I'm going to shift that back to you, because the little dialogue I have is kind of tiny, so you'll let me know. I'll stop probably at the end for questions unless something comes up. Okay. Back to our regularly scheduled program. Instead of just talking about metrics, Like, how are we learning? I think there's been a lot of neat shifts that have happened in the last 10 years in the Agile space, and some of them go unnamed. So it's a tell for me in poker player language, or a smell in the XP language, when people are overly focused on estimates, because they're not trying to learn from their estimates, they're trying to learn how to estimate. And a group of people that work together that try to get along over time, it becomes much more essential to learn from anomalies than to become exact about things, because if you're trying to learn to estimate, and the future's not like the past, then that's a fool's folly. So if you take the data that we're producing, and I put some snaps in here from VersionOne, I think that ideas like looking at velocity are kind of tools for teams within and across iterations. Task burn up or burn down charts within iterations are really, they're kind of tools for that team. They're tools for people. Another one of those big shifts is to say, let's stop worrying about how big these work units are, and let's try and make sure they're not too big. Let's get them down to about the same size, because when you start getting the work units to about the same size, then these lines tend to flow. They normalize and flow happens. And to get back into brand wars, I think people move naturally from cycle-based development like XP or Scrum to flow-based development, now called Kanban. One of the things that doesn't work well in my experience is to sell velocity outside of teams and across teams. I don't think it's the right metric. What I do think works fairly well across teams is a technique I took from VersionOne. It's kind of always been called a trend. Other people call it a burn-up. And to use the language I was just using before, it takes this line, oops, it takes this line, which I will tend to call discovery, and it maps it against this line, which I would call delivery. And it shows me across time, you know, if we trend out a little bit, are those two lines coming together? So in this case, there's growth happening. Now that wasn't supposed to be something you did in Agile, but it happens. And if you don't have visibility into it happening, you know, you can't start the right discussions. So this picture could be a team, or it could cross teams. If real product value doesn't come directly from a team, it comes from that producer-consumer relationship where the user is out here. They don't necessarily care about the teams. They just, that's probably a clear way to put it. I'll put it simpler from left to right. Here's a user. They make a request to this consumer, makes a request to this producer, and this is team A and team B. And the request goes back to the user. The user doesn't care what's happening in here. These metrics could normalize across that, because this is quantity and this is time. And as long as this represents the total amount of work to provide real value back, this graph, I think, works better across teams or at scale. Whereas I think this graph is a better view for learning about how a team is doing. But that's using tracking to learn. Learning from metrics instead of talking about metrics, instead of telling people they need to get more done. The last topic I really kind of wanted to touch on was, I called it real leadership. And I guess the challenge I'm going to put up is that I think within teams, if this model of a product owner who hopefully is within the team, and a Scrum Master, and a team composed of what I hear people often calling the makers. Could be UX people, could be development coders, could be testers, all the people that help produce something, could be someone from operational side. If that works for you, that's fine. Calling them Scrum Master and Product Owner. I do think it's interesting to go into shops and someone says, I'm the Scrum Master. My next question is usually, what does that mean? What do you do? Because in a brand-free world, I typically see that there's, inside a group, there's one or more people thinking about product. There's some people that are kind of guiding technology. These aren't new concepts. And then down here are all these makers. But not everyone is a guide, so there could be one or two people here and, 2, 3, 4 people down here. I like this idea, though, instead of saying there's the Scrum Master in the team, I like this idea of a whole team. I'll often will call this small group a project community, a group of people that are bonded together trying to produce something. There's usually some people that sit on the outside of that community, too. Sometimes they sit on the inside. The people that straddle that fence are the people that probably cut across teams and across time, like a user experience person may or may not have a full-time gig on a team, or an operational person, or a documentation person. People with different skills that maybe have a relationship with a few teams. Trying to fit everyone into the one team bucket seems a little bit simple. So I don't know what this Scrum Master does. If all they do is teach people the process, then hopefully they go away over time. Otherwise, I think we have another process police person. I do think over time we do need someone guiding technology and product. The makers are really good. This person's role could be pretty trivial. They could even be part-time. When you start scaling that across teams, it becomes more difficult. So to try and simplify the picture, let's just start with 2 teams. And for these 2 teams, we'll say that there's a product person and a technology person who are providing guidance, not dictating what to do. And there's, a set of these makers down here that are producing things. Again, coders, testers, UX, or people with development skills, people with testing skills, and people with design/user experience skills. 3 people might have all 3 of those skills. And you start saying, well, there's a collection of these. If each group can deploy and deliver whole product value independently, you can just roll with the simple model that works within a team. Suddenly, though, when that group needs to come together to deliver, there's cross-cutting concerns that haven't gone away, one of which is architectural thinking. So, like analysis, architecture is not dead. It's just distributed. If someone is really thinking across the group and they're not a dictator, but they're trying to say, let's not have these guys build a little bit of it, these guys build a lot of it, and these guys build another chunk, how do we find common abstractions across teams and promote them? For instance, if there's a producer and 2 consumers, and say, well, let's not build it here, let's build all of it here. There's a lot of that centralization we've been doing for a long time, and we continue to do. Now we call it things like enterprise service bus and such. Or someone that's thinking across the product. So each one of these consumers has a slice of the product. And this producer, this central team, they could be an engine group, they have a slice of the product. But this person's thinking across the use of all the teams. Having a forum for everyone that's in this circle here to be able to come together is a pretty meaningful way to work. If that happens to be called a scrum of scrums, and that's what you're trying to get out of it, then I think one of the values that exists from just simply setting up a cadence across these teams is the ability to do cross-cutting thinking. In aspect-oriented programming, they call that cross-cutting concerns. We could think of it as like cross-cutting products or product-driven architecture. There's all sorts of different names we could put up for that, because when this becomes the dimension that we plan against, then this is supporting that, which is what you hear when each one of these sub-teams becomes a feature team. Then you have the ability to figure out what are the right design decisions architecturally that support the product across those teams. It turns out that outside, those people outside the team I think it's better, it's more powerful to have them focused at this level, because this is more of what are we getting for our investments in the product? You know, how are we doing with our returns? What is the next best investment to make? The outsiders that I work with, this is more of their view of success. Down here is often what they call the IT process. For a lot of the people that are very addicted to certain process language, these people on the outside that are thinking about how are we doing as a company, or if you're a medical device, are we saving lives? They hear people come out of a meeting and they hear terms like, well, the Scrum Master said during the retrospective that we need to groom the backlog because the burn-up wasn't looking good. And to these people, that kind of sounds like blah, 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 because they're thinking about how is our product doing? What's going on in the market? It doesn't trivialize the need to have process and practices that bond people down here. But over time, what I see is that people move away from story points, and story tests are really valuable. And they realize that it's not necessarily how many points we got done. Points 10 years after the Agile Manifesto, for me, points are a little bit more like, you know, miles per hour. They're a speedometer, or miles per day. They're an odometer. They're a measure. The more valuable learning kind of goes up this path. Are people saying we're building the right thing? Are people buying our product? Is it saving people's lives? And that's, I think, more important when you start scaling things, because you go outside of a team and into an organization. And the further you get out of these loops, the more you step into the fabric of the organization. And a specific process doesn't really matter. It's a vehicle, not a solution. It's a group of people that are calling themselves the Lean Startup Group. Lean Startup kind of started in California. That's where I first heard of continuous delivery. Now, while they talk about Lean Startup and entrepreneurial things, if you throw all that stuff out, because it's sadly already becoming a little bit overhyped, what they've done is exactly what I've kind of been trying to do for a long time, is their focus is on learning. They're trying to say, we don't know what we don't know. We're not sure we understand our market. Okay, let's put some things into a backlog. It's not divorced from the Agile world. You can see that over here someone has mapped it to extreme programming as a delivery vehicle. But they're saying we need to come in with some unknowns so that we can learn. Doing something like Scrum or extreme programming, continuous delivery, continuous integration, having a set of automated tests that promotes continuous integration is fundamental to learning. Because if you're doing continuous delivery and you're deploying something into production and you crash the production servers, you don't learn. Within a team, one product, let's say max of 15 people, it's a challenge. It's significantly more easy than 10 teams and a couple hundred people. That's more difficult. It's as valuable in both cases. And what these guys call learning is a pivot. The difference between a pivot and I think maybe what's happening on some Agile projects is it's like, let's not just rank order the backlog and do these 5 things and then do these 5 things and then keep doing the next 5 things. Let's stop and validate. Now, if we're actually building a whole product, getting whole things done out to the point where we can measure it, we can make more interesting decisions. We learn more, and we make better decisions about where to go. That's true within teams, across teams. It actually feeds more meaningful thinking of people outside teams. For instance, those sales and marketing people that developers are always telling me are so evil. And in truth, some of them are evil. Other people I meet from that space are desperately selling what they can because they're not sure when they're going to get something that they can put in front of people. So they have no way to pivot. I tried to leave some time here for questions at the end. I guess the last thing I want to leave you with is this goofy idea that I've been using for a long time to try and keep myself sane, which is my version of Ohm's law, which is Dude's law. It really applies to within and across teams, and at scale it's even more significant. Is ask yourself why you're doing something before you start doing it. Don't rush out to have everyone at your company go take an Agile course. If you've had success on one project and you have other projects that are like that, you might be able to just draw from that existing success. Don't assume that success in one place is going to replicate magically. Figure out what the context is before you start trying to scale Agile or be enterprise Agile. Make sure the decisions that you're making across teams are significant, are driven by significant outcomes, as opposed to telling everyone they have to do Scrum. And that's not necessarily me telling you what you should do. It's me trying to share what I see as successful versus what I see as just merely prescriptive. So Lauren, let's go through some of these questions, and you can read them to me and maybe just click them off as we go.
Yeah, of course. So the first one, our Scrum Masters are typically facilitators who schedule design meetings, take notes, follow up on output from design sessions, etc. Who do you envision doing this role if the Scrum Master is not a defined member of the team?
Yeah. Why do we think that you have to have a special skill to set up meetings? I always think it's interesting when people say to me, our Scrum Master is a facilitator. You know, I don't know if I aspire to be a facilitator. And I've seen some Scrum Masters, not all, facilitate what I would call extreme mediocrity, because they didn't know anything about programming, and they thought all was well because they were following the process. So to answer your question directly, I've watched teams take ownership of scheduling those things. I don't buy into the fact that the Scrum Master leads meetings. I don't know if over time that sounds kind of like an addiction. You know, and I'm not all hippie and love and roses. I get that oftentimes there needs to be a leader. I guess I'm just at scale. I see when that leader is more tied to the product instead of the process, that it produces more meaningful results. I'm very dubious of Scrum Masters who feel like they need to be around all the time so people are doing Scrum, because the goal is to produce. Scrum is just a vehicle. What's the next question?
All right. How does it work when you have Scrum Masters and project managers on the same team in Agile?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, kind of there's this nebulous discussion of what is a Scrum Master. If the person is there to teach the process, then over time I would hope they would go away. A lot of yesterday's bad project managers are today's bad Scrum Masters. And the essence of what, this whole Agile movement is lost on them. In fact, I meet developers that say to me, I used to get hassled once a week at the stand-up meeting or at the status meeting, and now it happens every day for 15 minutes. If that's what that person's idea of facilitation is, I would probably quit their team. I wouldn't really want to work in that environment. If Scrum Master means something closer to kind of what coach, which by the way is a term most people outside of the IT space get right away, many of them have no idea what a Scrum Master is, then I think it's more of someone that's there that's trying to help a team find their way. Some of the early XP coaches sat and paired with people, and that was a great way to learn about people as well as teach skills and discover issues. That's not facilitation, though. That's being an active member of a team, being part of the group, maybe even being connected to the delivery a little bit. That person would not necessarily collide with a project manager who might be reporting out. It's another way, if you get rid of all the terms and the brands and everything, this is a team of makers right here, and there's someone that's helping that group find their way. If their problems are with coding, that person's going to need to have some coding chops. And there's someone that might be reporting out, rolling up the numbers they're producing. So that's a way that a Scrum Master, if that's how they're working, can work with a project manager. Usually when there's a collision between Scrum Master and project manager, that's a symptom, not a problem. It's a symptom of something that they're both fighting for this control. It could be that the project manager doesn't really want to let self-organization happen. At the same time, I've met project managers that said, you're not giving people clear direction, and that's why they aren't able to self-organize. So I think we need to stop. I'm absolutely beyond tired of people being, especially in the Scrum community, throwing every project manager under the bus like they're all evil. I mean, there's as many messed up developers as there are messed up project managers, and there's a lot of Scrum Masters today that I would never want to work for. Not to beat the issue, but because all they care about is doing Scrum, and I don't really care about doing Scrum. It's a tool. I care about producing things and helping others learn how to produce things. Next question.
All right. If we don't have the 3 questions in the daily stand-up, do you have any suggestions for what they should do in place of that?
So that's a great question, and it's an inevitable question because over time, many people's stand-up meetings turn into bad status meetings. And I go to stand-ups and I hear people say, yesterday I was in meetings all day, today I'm in meetings all day, no blockers. And I think to myself, what are these people trying to get out of their stand-up? Why are they trying to do it? I think the 3 questions are a nice mechanical thing that try to solve a problem of saying, is there visibility into what people are doing? Is there redundancy? Are people focused on priorities? And what is actually blocking people? So if the 3 questions are doing that for you, that's fine. But if you have things like, task walls, the visibility piece is a little bit simpler. The task wall might also show, what's getting done and what the priorities are. And if you look up at a task wall, a simple one might have stories and then tasks, or it could be a Kanban wall or whatever. It's just a visual indicator of what's queued up, what's in progress, and what's completed, so that you're trying to incrementally get whole things flowing through. Then standing there and talking about what you did feels kind of like I, me. So to answer this person's question, one of the things people do is they throw out the 3 questions and they speak to how are we doing getting these things done. Which is, I think, why a lot of people move from Scrum to Kanban, is because Scrum was not talking about their implementation of Scrum was not talking about what they were delivering. Another thing I do with groups to say, well, we're trying to do discovery, and I think stand-ups were a meeting killer, a bad meeting killer. So for me, a little bit of what that is I want to say, who do I want to connect with? What did I discover? And then what's blocking me? I might do that after we go through the stories, because this drives more of a product, meaningful, outcome-focused discussion. Whereas I think over time, for a lot of groups, the 3 questions tend to be a status-based discussion, not for everyone. So hopefully that helps that person answer the questions. I think if you ask yourself what you're trying to get out of a stand-up and the 3 questions work, that's fine. If they just turn into a mechanism and you have a whole bunch of this, and you don't really know why you're doing it, this is a simple math equation, you end up getting less of this. You're not getting the value that you're maybe trying to. What's the next question?
All right, next question. How do you build a team or community to allow for team accountability? This particular person sees the team looking to their Scrum Master or Product Manager to be the bad guy or the buck stops here authority.
Yeah, so that's a pretty enormous question to try and field in 9 minutes or less. I think you have to start, or I think a place to start is understanding the root cause. I met a clever guy from Hungary once. His name was Paul, and he said to me, if you fence people in, they will become sheep. So if you've established a long-running ecosystem where people feel dependent or fearful and unable to act, I don't know if you can just turn around and blame them and say, why are you not being spontaneously collaborative? I think that this is a little bit of a harsh comment, but I heard someone say once, where there's Scrum Masters, there's Scrum slaves. And I personally just don't like the whole term of Scrum Master. I'm not saying that's what it always is, but when I walk into someone's stand-up and the Scrum Master is leading it or facilitating it, you immediately start taking away people's ability to be leaders. So, you know, one of the things that I think happens a lot of times that's damaging in this area, just to give this person one context, is in a stand-up or a daily Scrum, someone starts talking, and the Scrum Master looks over him and says, you're talking too much, we have to take that offline. And if you don't acknowledge what that person's talking about, and then you don't actually follow it up, you know, you're not much of a Scrum Master or a coach or a facilitator. You just shut someone down. And what I typically do is try to get people to think of it like a little meter. And over here is discussion, and over here, discussion, over here is solution. And I think when people start edging towards solving a problem, that might be where I say, hey, it feels like we're trying to solve this, because trying to solve difficult problems in 15 minutes or less, or 2 minutes or less, can often be a very poor choice. And so that's what I do with groups, is let people talk to each other, ask someone else to lead the stand-up every day if someone needs to lead it. And then when they go from discussion into solution, I would say, hey, let's stop. You know, what are we talking about? Who wants to be involved? Allow people to opt into meetings instead of scheduling them to meetings. And then directly to your question, who wants to set that up, facilitate it, lead it? Any way to incrementally grow small little blips of leadership, I think, is very helpful. Next question.
All right. Do you consider the product owner as a part of the team, as someone who should be a part of all team activities like design decisions, as well as pre-planning and retro meetings?
Yeah, pre-planning is probably what I would call a product planning cadence. Because the pre-planning thing is usually a smell. It's an indication that there's maybe fear around dynamic design. I don't know if a product planner that doesn't have technology skills should be telling you how to build the software. But I don't like this model where the Scrum Master and the team gang up against the product owner. I also don't like this model, this is almost feeds the last question, where the development team really has not a lot of product ownership. They are just there, and when things don't go well, they go talk to the product. They say, well, the stories weren't good, or the product owner didn't show up at the meeting. I mean, if you hear that enough times around enough teams around the world, you realize that maybe the problem is not all these product owners. So yeah, I think we need to start setting up teams where we don't slice things so discreetly into this neat little bucket of every team is this product owner and the Scrum Master and then this team. I think that's kind of the simplistic way to work. It might have worked for a while. I'm more interested in having a group of people that have design skills or product thinking, and a bunch of people that have delivery skills, or they're what I would be calling those makers, developers, and testers. Looks like we still have time for a few more questions if there's more.
Okay, yeah, one more. How do you apply lessons from one team to another if the experience is always different? How do you go past that to carry lessons from one team to another? I mean, with every, well, I'm trying to put it all into one sentence. Basically, how do you apply lessons from one team to another if the experience is always different, the team is different, each experience is unique?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? So if you're trying to apply, and my sports metaphors are shallow, if you're trying to apply lessons from a bobsled team to a soccer team, there's not a lot of mapping there. There's some, but those are very different experiences. If you're trying to map a hockey team to a soccer team, So I grew up in an era where soccer wasn't much of a sport in the States, and I was one of the weirdos that played it. And a lot of the people on my team were hockey players. And hockey and soccer are both dynamic activities where the team moves up and down the pitch in like an accordion-like fashion, and it's very easy for people to move between those. It's just a different medium. So my point being is you have to kind of understand what are the differences from this group to this group. You know, and you can assess them in all sorts of different ways. Are they building the same product? Are they using the same technology stack? Are in the same division if it's at scale inside a large company? Are the same size? Are they building new products or old products? And, you know, have these people worked together for a long time, or is this team brand new? If you look at some simple set of criteria, I think you start making a little bit more rational decisions about trying to compare groups. So there are places I've worked where Team A is 6 people that have worked together for a very long time. They have strong confidence in their skills. They both know how to construct things, and they understand the product domain, and they get along pretty well. And you ask them to work in a collaborative manner that allows them to learn more often, and it's like pouring gas on the flames. They're thrilled. If Team B is a bunch of people that have never worked together before in an environment where people don't feel very comfortable, and these could be 2 divisions or 2 projects right next to each other in the same company, there's not much of a comparison. I think if you look at it to bring this talk full circle, and you say in both groups, I'm trying to drive a similar outcome. And one of the outcomes I want is more frequent integration. Then you start saying, how is Team A doing that and how is Team B doing it? Turns out they're doing it 2 different ways but producing the same results. Is that necessarily bad? Because the PMOs that I meet that are trying to drive consistent process might damage one of those 2 teams in the hopes of having everyone do things the same way. So I think there has to be some kind of comparison. One of the tools I've been using quite a bit lately, it's a very, very simple tool to try and ground agile development, is to try and ask people to say, go through and build a little matrix that speaks to the practices that you think are, that you want to try, the value you think they're going to deliver. If you're struggling with expressing the value, steal something from Brian Merrick and talk about an example. And then the constraints that exist. And the constraints column is where a lot of the differences, the learning across teams falls apart, because one is geographically distributed and one's co-located. Those are very different teams. And it gives me a moment to just do a grossly shameful plug to say, I released a set of videos, the first 3 of which are out, and one of them actually deals with these exact topics. So the videos are around helping people figure out how they're going to use Agile methods. I call that series Planning a Coach, one of which has this concept of helping people figure out what practices are going to help people. The second one is about story mapping and customers and chartering, collaborative chartering, and the third one's about discovery and delivery. And I tried to put them in these little 1-hour videos that I filmed in front of an audience. And I think they address many of these same topics, because the Planning to Coach section was me trying to get people to make intentional decisions about their product. If you're looking for the URL, you can just Google Pragmatic Bookshelf and my name, and you'll come up with it. But it really speaks to many of these topics, like how do you make a process fit a group? If you think about that, then you say, well, how do you make that fit a organization? And it comes back to what are you trying to accomplish, as opposed to tell people what to do.
All right. Well, I think we're right at the hour. I just want to say thank you to everyone for attending. Thank you, of course, to David for presenting. We will email all attendees a link of the recording, and we'll throw in the link to David's videos. And just thanks again to everyone.
And Lauren, if for people that didn't get their questions answered, if you email me and remind me that you asked the question during this webinar, I will answer your question as long as you promise not to spam me.
Okay, great.
Okay, take care.
Thanks, David.